I still remember the sound of my sister's laugh. Not the normal one she used when she talked to her friends or flirted her way out of speeding tickets. I mean the one she saved just for me. The sharp, condescending kind that told everyone in the room exactly where I stood in the Morales family food chain. That laugh showed up long before I ever said the word Navy. It was there when I brought home average grades, when I tripped during field day, when I walked downstairs wearing anything she didn't approve of. But the day I told her I wanted to serve, she sharpened that laugh like a weapon. I was 12 when the idea first hit me. Our town held a huge 4th of July parade every year. Most kids cheered at the candy being thrown or the fire trucks blasting their sirens. I didn't care about any of that. What caught my eye was the Navy group marching in the middle. Clean uniforms, steady steps, no hesitation, no pretending to be confident. Just people who knew exactly where they were going and weren't afraid to take up space. I didn't know what purpose meant at that age, but for the first time, I felt something close. I went home buzzing with excitement, rambling about how I wanted to serve one day. And Harper, standing in the kitchen with a bowl of strawberries like she was posing for a catalog, rolled her eyes and let out that trademark laugh. "Please," she said, tossing a strawberry into her mouth. "You? In the Navy? Do they even take people who can barely speak up in homeroom?" Mom told her to stop being mean, but she was smiling when she said it. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. Harper shrugged, smirking like she'd done me a favor by giving me a quick reality check. Nothing kills a child's dream faster than a sibling who knows exactly where to stab. That was the dynamic. Harper, the star, the favorite, the child who made sense. Me, the quiet one, the awkward one, the one teachers forgot was in the room. Harper's achievements decorated the walls. Mine decorated the fridge only if Mom needed to cover a stain. Things didn't get better with age. Harper joined every club, won every award, and perfected a personality adults adored. I was the kid who got compared to her so often, I could have legally changed my name to, "Why can't you be more like Harper?" The funny part? Harper wasn't actually kind. She was polished. Adults saw the polish. Kids my age saw the claws. But she played the game so well that my parents never noticed how much she loved pushing me into corners just to watch me fold. By the time I hit 16, I kept my dreams to myself. I studied Navy careers online only after everyone went to bed. I memorized enlistment requirements. I ran before sunrise to avoid Harper accidentally filming me to mock my weird running face. Anything she didn't like became a joke. Anything I cared about became a target. I never gave her the satisfaction of reacting. That was my survival strategy. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay out of the way. But somehow, she always found a way to make me the punchline. The moment things truly snapped wasn't even dramatic. It was subtle, quiet, the kind you look back on years later and realize that's where the whole mess started. A group of relatives came over for a barbecue. Harper, being Harper, positioned herself as the host even though she was 17 and legally not allowed to pour half the drinks she was handing out. She floated around the backyard, laughing loudly, retelling stories, making everyone feel like the special guest of the Morales household. Then she landed near me, her shadow stretching long like it always did. "You gonna tell them?" she asked, grinning. "About your little military fantasy?" I didn't answer. I should have known silence only made her hungrier. She turned to the group and announced, "Kendra wants to join the Navy. Isn't that adorable?" She'd last, what, a day? The adults chuckled. Someone said, "Well, that's ambitious," in the tone people use when a toddler says they want to be president. I forced a smile, even though my chest felt like it was shrinking. Harper beamed, pleased with herself. That night, lying in bed, I realized something. I wasn't hurt because she didn't believe in me. I was hurt because she needed me to fail to keep her place in the family intact. My dream wasn't the problem. The problem was that it belonged to me. You'd think that kind of constant belittling would push me to fight back. It didn't. It pushed me to hide better. I learned how to shrink so she couldn't get a grip on me. Harper's entire personality was built on performing. Mine was built on not giving her more material. But dreams have a way of surviving even when people try to suffocate them. At 17, I started researching enlistment requirements more seriously. I didn't tell anyone. especially not Harper. I knew she'd burn it to the ground just to watch me panic. Maybe that was my first act of quiet rebellion, dreaming in private. The closer I got to 18, the more I felt the pressure building. Harper's comments sharpened. She sensed I was hiding something and poked at me constantly. I'm convinced older sisters develop a sixth sense solely for detecting secrets they can weaponize. Around that time, family gatherings became worse. Harper narrated my life like she was doing stand-up. I became her favorite joke. Eventually, even the relatives started joining in. They didn't mean harm. They were just following the tone Harper set. One night, after yet another round of mockery disguised as just teasing, something in me started shifting. I felt it quietly, like a slow click inside my chest. I didn't know it then, but a few months later, that click would turn into a complete break from the only home I'd ever known. If you've ever lived in a family like that, share your story in the comments. And if you enjoy family revenge stories and military revenge stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The shift inside me didn't happen loudly. It started with one moment where I realized staying small wasn't making me safer. It was making me vanish. The shift inside me carried straight into the week of my 18th birthday, sitting in my chest like a quiet warning. I didn't tell anyone about the ASVAB appointment I'd scheduled. I kept that email printed and folded in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license like contraband. Holding on to it made me feel like I had a way out, even if I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. Especially not in a house where secrets traveled faster than Wi-Fi. My birthday fell on a Saturday, which meant Harper treated it like her own holiday. She coordinated everything: menu, decorations, guest list, even the playlist. Mom called it helping. I called it hostile takeover, but arguing with Harper usually meant a longer lecture later, so I let her run the show. I stayed quiet, wiping down countertops while she barked instructions like she was leading a wedding rehearsal. Right before guests arrived, she looked me up and down with that familiar mix of judgment and amusement. "At least brush your hair. It's your birthday, not a court date." I brushed it, not because she told me to, but because I didn't need extra attention that day. I already had enough nerves buzzing under my skin. The house filled quickly. Uncles, aunts, neighbors, Dad's coworkers. Harper floated through the crowd like she owned the air everyone breathed. Meanwhile, I stuck to the edges, thanking people for wishes they barely finished saying before drifting toward the buffet table. Dad didn't even say happy birthday until Mom nudged him. He muttered it half-heartedly, like he was reading it off a cereal box. Harper gave me a sugary smile and squeezed my arm, pretending she was the supportive sister in front of her audience. She always performed best when she had a crowd. I should have known she'd been waiting for the perfect moment. It came after dinner, when Mom dimmed the lights and brought out the cake. Everyone clapped. Harper insisted on lighting the candles herself, narrating every step like she was hosting an awards show. "Kendra's big 18, she announced. "Adult life begins now. Huge decisions. Big responsibilities." I felt my stomach drop. Whenever Harper tried to sound sincere, disaster followed. She held the cake in front of me. "Make a wish," she said sweetly. Then, before I could inhale, she added, "Maybe wish for a backup plan, since the Navy clearly isn't interested." The room blinked in confusion, then shifted toward me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" Harper rolled her eyes dramatically. "Kendra, please? Don't make this weird. You missed your ASVAB appointment. The Navy doesn't reschedule no-shows. It's embarrassing. I had to tell Mom because she kept bragging about you." Aunt Marcia made a soft, "oh dear" sound, someone whispered. Dad frowned like he'd known this would happen. The humiliation hit fast, hot, and sharp. But here's the part that gutted me. I hadn't missed anything. I never received the reminder. And the only person who knew about the appointment because she snooped through my mail was Harper. My throat tightened. You went through my stuff." Harper laughed like I was being dramatic. "Relax. It was sitting on your desk. And honestly, I did you a favor. You barely survived high school gym. The military isn't for everyone." The worst part wasn't the words. It was how everyone nodded, like she'd made a practical point. Mom stepped in gently. Honey, maybe the Navy just isn't the right fit. Dad added, it's not the end of the world. Harper smirked at me over the cake, basking in the spotlight she'd built on my back. I stared at her, feeling something in me snap cleanly, like a thin wire pulled too tight. Blow out the candles, sweetheart, Mom urged. I didn't. I pushed the cake back into Harper's hands firm enough that she stumbled and walked out. No yelling, no crying, no dramatic exit line. Just movement. I headed upstairs, grabbed the backpack already half-packed with the things I didn't want Harper touching, then walked straight downstairs while everyone watched in confused silence. Mom called after me. Dad asked where I thought I was going. Harper muttered something like, she's being overdramatic again. None of it mattered. That quiet click inside my chest had shifted into certainty. I reached the front door, opened it, and stepped into the night air that felt colder and clearer than anything inside that house. My car was parked at the curb, half a tank of gas, $26 in my wallet, no plan except one. I wasn't staying another night in a place where my dreams were entertainment for my sister. I started the engine. The noise from inside the house faded behind me into muffled chatter. I didn't look back, not once. If I had, I'm not sure I would have kept driving. Halfway down the street, something surprising washed over me. Not fear, not regret, but relief. The kind you feel when the dentist finally pulls a tooth that's been hurting you for years. I drove until the neighborhood streetlights were far behind me, until every mile between me and that birthday party felt like oxygen. The road kept stretching in front of me long after the streetlights disappeared, and the farther I drove, the lighter my chest felt. It wasn't joy. It was more like the numb, steady calm that kicks in when you've already lost everything and there's nothing left to negotiate. I didn't have a destination, just movement. And for the first time in years, Harper wasn't in the passenger seat of my mind, telling me what I couldn't do. By midnight, the adrenaline faded and reality caught up. I pulled into a Walmart parking lot because it was lit, open all night, and full of strangers who didn't care who I was or why I was there. I parked near the edge of the lot, turned the engine off, and sat in the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. My phone buzzed once, Mom, then again, Mom. No voicemail, no text asking if I was safe. Just missed calls, so she wouldn't look bad in front of guests when someone asked if she'd tried. I turned the phone face down and leaned my seat back. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but nothing came out. Maybe you can only be humiliated so many times in one night before your body shuts off the tear supply. Eventually, exhaustion won. I slept in the car, wrapped in 2 jackets that weren't warm enough. I woke up stiff, hungry, and still wearing the same clothes from the party. A couple walked past my car loading groceries into their trunk. The woman gave me a sympathetic glance, the kind strangers give when they don't want to judge you but absolutely are. I adjusted the rearview mirror and caught my reflection. Wild hair, puffiness under my eyes, smudged mascara. I looked like a before picture in a makeover ad. I washed up inside the store and decided the next logical step was finding work. Anything. Anywhere. I needed gas and food before I could even think about the Navy again. That's how I ended up at the all-night diner across the lot. The neon sign flickered, buzzing just enough to keep the place from feeling completely dead. Inside, 2 truckers sat at the counter, a couple teenagers occupied a booth, and a woman in her 50s was wiping down tables with the efficiency of someone who'd done this her entire life. Her name tag said Sharon. "Looking for a table?" she asked, glancing up briefly. "Actually, a job," I said, voice rough from sleep and embarrassment. That made her pause. She gave me a longer look, not judgmental, just observant in a way that felt almost military. She nodded toward the corner. "Sit. Let me finish this." I sat in a booth while she wiped the last table, tossed the rag into a bucket, then slid into the seat across from me. Up close, she looked like someone who'd seen every type of disaster a person could walk into a diner carrying. "You run away or get kicked out?" she asked plainly. "Ran," I said. She nodded once, as if that answer made sense. "You got experience?" "No." "Hunga?" My stomach answered for me. That seemed to be enough. "Dishwasher. 3 nights a week," Cash. If you don't flake. I won't, I said, too quickly. That's what they all say. She pushed the menu toward me. Order something you can finish. I picked pancakes because they were cheap, and I needed comfort more than protein. She watched me eat for a minute, then leaned back with her arms crossed. You're not built for waiting tables, she said matter-of-factly. Too tense, too quiet, too internal. Thanks, I said, not sure what that meant. Not an insult. She pointed a finger at me. You remind me of recruits, the ones who overthink before they act. I froze. Recruits? Her eyes flicked to my reaction. Navy, 15 years. You thinking about joining? The universe has a strange sense of humor. I nodded slowly, afraid she'd laugh like Harper did. But Sharon didn't laugh. She didn't smirk. She didn't throw verbal darts wrapped in fake concern. Instead, she said, You smart enough for the ASVAB? I think so. Ooh. You think or you know? I hesitated. I studied. I had an appointment. My sister, she... The words jammed in my throat, half anger, half shame. Sharon didn't need the details. Her face softened just enough. Family sabotage is common. Recruiters hear it all the time. That surprised me. Really? You'd be amazed how many people fail the first test because someone close didn't want them to succeed. She drummed her fingers on the table. Take it again. Clean slate. No one can stop you from booking a new date unless you let them. She said it so plainly I almost believed it immediately. How? I asked, hoping she had a magic button. You go online. You call a recruiter. You show up on time. You pass. She shrugged. It's not complicated. Hard? Yes. Complicated? No. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small notepad. She scribbled a number and slid it over to me. Ask for Petty Officer Langdon. Tell him Sharon Wells sent you. He'll know what to do. I stared at the paper like it was a lifeline someone had just thrown into deep water. Why are you helping me? I asked honestly. Sharon shrugged again. You walked in looking like someone who'd been pushed off a cliff. The Navy teaches you how to climb back up. Might as well hand you a rope. Her tone wasn't warm or gentle. It was direct and worn in. The kind of tone from someone who learned lessons the hard way and didn't waste time sugarcoating. I kept the scrap of paper like it was something precious, something alive. That night, after washing a mountain of dishes that smelled like regret and frying oil, I sat in my car and stared at my phone screen. My thumb hovered over the call button. Sharon was right about recruits. Overthinking is easy. Action is harder. But I pressed the button anyway, listening to the ring echo in my small car as I felt something shift again, sharper this time, a pull towards something that might finally belong to me. When the recruiter picked up, I sat straighter, ready to claim the piece of my life I'd let my sister take for too long. The recruiter's voice was steady on the other end of the line, and hearing someone talk to me like I was capable of something did more for my spine than a decade of living with Harper ever did. By the time I hung up, I had a new ASVAB date, a checklist of documents, and an undercurrent of adrenaline that stayed with me through every dish shift at the diner. It carried me through the test, through the waiting period, and straight into the moment I opened the email saying I'd passed with a score good enough to choose from more jobs than I'd expected. That same pulse followed me onto the bus headed to Great Lakes. The ride smelled like new fabric, nerves, and the kind of forced excitement people use to hide the fact that they're terrified. I kept my gaze forward, hands clenched around my paperwork folder. No one knew I was leaving except Sharon, and she insisted on hugging me before I boarded, muttering something about, "Don't make me regret vouching for you." For her, that was practically a love letter. Boot camp wasted no time proving that life had a whole new definition of difficult. The moment we stepped off the bus, a wall of yelling hit us so fast I wondered if we'd wandered into an active crime scene. A chief stomped up the aisle, barking at us to move faster, even though some of us hadn't figured out which direction faster was supposed to be. We rushed into formation. People tripped, someone dropped their bag, and 3 different instructors descended on him like he'd set off a flare. Every rookie instinct in me screamed to freeze, which I quickly learned was the worst possible option. In boot camp, motion is survival. The first 48 hours felt like they lasted 2 weeks. We barely slept, didn't know where anything was, and kept lining up in the wrong places. Everything was loud, rushed, and unforgiving, but there was something clarifying about it too. Nobody knew my past here. Nobody knew Harper. Nobody had a picture-perfect version of me to hold up against reality. Everyone was equally lost, equally confused, equally exhausted. It was the most level playing field I'd ever been on. Training days blurred together. Physical training at 4:30 inches the morning. Inspections, marching drills, classroom lectures, gear issue, cleaning stations, more inspections. Our racks had to be made so tight you could bounce a quarter off the sheets. It was the first time since childhood that precision actually mattered. Back home, perfection only mattered when Harper did it. Here, perfection mattered because your RDC said it did, and you didn't want to find out what happened if you didn't deliver. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. I learned that blisters can hurt so badly, they make you reconsider your career choices. I learned that fast showers aren't just encouraged, they're a lifestyle. And I learned that the Navy has about 57 ways to tell you you're doing something wrong without swearing. But the toughest part wasn't the exhaustion or the yelling, it was the swim qualification. To pass the Navy's 50-yard swim test, you had to jump off a platform into deep water, swim across the pool, and float or tread for 5 minutes. Simple, if you're a normal human. I, unfortunately, was not. I could swim, technically, but only the kind of swimming you do at a family pool where you touch the bottom every few strokes. Deep water had always bothered me, and the sound of the pool room echoing made everything worse. My first attempt was a mess. I jumped, surfaced, and immediately started dog paddling like a toddler who'd been pushed in without floaties. Halfway across, panic crawled up my throat. By the time I reached the edge, I was gasping so hard the RDC told me to get out before I passed out. "You're taking it again," she said firmly. "You don't quit here." Line. I nodded, even though my lungs were still arguing about oxygen rights. The next morning, my body felt heavy with dread. The water looked bigger, colder, deeper. I stared at the platform and wondered how many disastrous choices led me to this moment. The chief overseeing the test watched me closely. She was the same one who'd yelled at us the first night, but up close, she looked less like a storm and more like someone who'd seen a lot of rookies panic in this exact spot. "Morales," she said, stepping beside me. "You thinking too much. Get in the water and stop trying to negotiate with it." Her tone wasn't gentle, but it wasn't mocking either. It was exactly the type of blunt encouragement my family never understood how to give. I climbed onto the platform, forced my mind blank, and jumped. The cold hit me harder this time, but panic didn't take over. I kicked, reached, pulled, counting each stroke as if numbers were going to save me. My arms burned halfway across. My throat tightened, but the chief's voice cut through the noise. "Stop fighting the water, use it." I heard that sentence like someone had thrown me a rope. I slowed down, steadied my movements, stopped clawing like I was drowning, and suddenly, the distance didn't feel impossible. I reached the wall, slapped it, and turned to float. My chest rose and fell. My legs trembled, but I didn't sink. When the timer ended, I pulled myself out of the pool with shaking arms, water dripping off me like I had just clawed my way out of a lake of fear. The chief nodded once. "Better," she said. "Now keep that version of you." That version. The one that didn't fold. The one Harper had never met. From that day on, something clicked differently in me. Boot camp was still brutal, but I stopped measuring myself by how loudly people around me lived. I measured myself by how I reacted to the parts that were designed to break me. There was a night, a few weeks in, when the lights snapped off and the compartment went quiet. Recruits snored, turned, mumbled in their sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the ventilation system, and realized I no longer felt like I was running from something. I was moving towards something that finally felt like mine. My body hurt. My feet were blistered. My hair smelled like the inside of a ship, but everything inside me was steadier than it had ever been. That version of me was just getting started. The version of me that survived the swim test carried straight into the day our RDCs handed us our orders. My hands didn't shake when I read the destination. My stomach did, But my hands stayed steady, which felt like personal growth. A few of us were headed to the Middle East. The briefing was short, practical, and had zero interest in coddling anyone. By the time graduation came, I wasn't celebrating a finish line. I was preparing for a beginning that didn't care how ready I thought I was. Flying into heat that felt like someone opened an oven door directly onto my face was the welcome I got when we landed. I had seen temperatures hit triple digits, but nothing like this. The air looked thick, like it had weight. By the time I stepped off the bus onto base, sweat was sliding down my back even though I hadn't done anything besides breathe. Deployment life had a rhythm, but it wasn't one you eased into. It was one you adapted to, whether you liked it or not. My days started before sunrise because the sun was too aggressive to work under past noon without feeling like your bones were roasting. I handled logistics and watch rotations, tasks that weren't glamorous but mattered more than most people outside the military ever realize. 12-hour shifts blurred into each other. Some nights, I'd finish watch and still feel the vibration of the comms equipment in my hands. Other times I'd sit on my rack, boots still on, convincing myself to stand long enough to shower. The heat didn't just sit in your clothing, it nested. I would wash my uniform only for it to be drenched again an hour later. While I adjusted to deployment, my personal life remained as quiet as it had been the day I drove away. No messages from Mom. No calls. Harper posted a picture with friends at a winery. Another in a new dress. Another in front of some getaway house her boyfriend rented. It wasn't that I expected her to suddenly care. I just hoped she'd run out of things to brag about eventually. The people around me learned who I was much faster than my family ever had. There's something about deployment that strips away the fake layers. Nobody cares what you were in high school or how popular you were. What matters is how you show up when things get difficult. What matters is whether you carry your weight or make someone else carry it for you. I earned respect slowly. I did my job, kept my head down, and didn't complain unless someone's mistake could actually get someone hurt. One of the guys on my watch team, a second-class petty officer named Denton, told me one night, "You're quiet, Morales, but you're reliable. Quiet, reliable beats loud, useless every time." I took that as a compliment. Deployment wasn't dramatic most days. It wasn't constant action or movie scenes. It was long tasks, predictable routines, and a constant awareness that screwing up had real consequences. But there were moments that branded themselves into your memory. Mine happened halfway through the rotation. It was a night shift, and the temperature had finally dipped low enough that the air didn't feel like punishment. We were running checks when a fault alarm flashed across the board. Denton thought it was a bad sensor. Another sailor thought it was electrical interference. We'd had false alarms before equipment in heat. This intense didn't exactly behave like brand new tech. But then the second alarm went off. Louder, sharper. Within seconds, we were moving. Training kicks in, whether you think you're ready or not. I followed Denton outside, where the air was thick with dust kicked up by the sudden movement of vehicles. The fault wasn't a small glitch. It was a real issue, a generator problem, that could have shut down a portion of our power if it wasn't handled fast. I was the junior among them, but I didn't freeze. I grabbed tools, relayed information, held lights steady, climbed where they told me to climb. Sweat soaked through every layer of clothing. A wave of heat rolled off the equipment, and for a split second it felt like the world narrowed down to noise, brightness, and the thudding of my own pulse. Something sparked a bright, sharp streak of white. Someone yelled. Denton jerked back, and everything in me reacted before my brain caught up. I lunged forward, yanked the cable he'd been reaching for, and redirected it before it could hit anything that would have turned that spark into a much bigger problem. The whole thing lasted seconds. My breathing didn't return to normal for minutes. When it was under control, Denton stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to scold me or shake my hand. "Morales," he said finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. I don't know if that was bravery or poor impulse control, but I'll take it. Someone else clapped my shoulder. Another muttered that I'd earned my paycheck that night. I didn't feel heroic. I felt awake in a way I hadn't since the day I left home, fully present, fully responsible, fully myself. Later, back in the bunk area, while everyone settled down and the hum of generators smoothed into the background, I lay on my rack and stared at the metal above me. My hands shook a little now that everything was over. Not from fear, from the realization that I could do things my sister never imagined I was capable of. Not because she was wrong about me, but because she never bothered to look closely enough to find out. In the morning, the chief pulled me aside and said, "Good work last night. Keep your head and you'll go far." Her voice wasn't warm, but it was respect. And respect is worth more than anything I ever chased in my parents' house. Life on deployment didn't get easier after that night, but it settled differently around me. I walked with more certainty. I worked with more focus. I stopped flinching every time someone raised their voice, because now I knew I could handle more than I ever thought. The Middle East heat didn't soften. The shifts didn't shorten. The exhaustion didn't leave. But I could feel something shifting inside me again, a steady determination that had nothing to do with proving Harper wrong, and everything to do with proving something to myself. The steadiness I carried through deployment stayed with me long after we rotated out. Coming home didn't feel like returning to anything. It felt like stepping into a clearer version of myself, one that didn't shrink or apologize just to keep someone else comfortable. I took a few days to breathe, then went straight into planning my next move. If I wanted a career instead of just a contract, I needed to think bigger, something I never allowed myself to do when I lived under Harper's shadow. The idea of applying to OCS had been floating around my head since the night shift incident. The chief who pulled me aside afterward wasn't the sentimental type, and she didn't hand out encouragement easily, which made her approval mean more than I expected. Every time she said I showed promise, I took it seriously because she didn't believe in hype. She believed in competence. Applying wasn't simple. Becoming an officer meant more school, more testing, more evaluations, more people digging through your record to see if you deserved the chance. It also meant putting myself in a place where failure was a very real option. Weirdly enough, the thought didn't scare me as much as it used to. I brought up the idea with Sharon during one of our rare phone calls. She was at the diner, judging by the clatter of dishes in the background. "So you want to be a Navy officer," she said, like I'd just told her I planned to bake a cake or take a walk. "Yeah," I said. "You think I can do it?" "Morales, I thought you could do it before you knew you could," she replied. "Just don't overthink it. That's your weak spot." She wasn't wrong. Overthinking was practically my cardio. Still, the application went in. I doubled down on studying, running, and working on every leadership skill I'd ignored growing up, because those skills weren't exactly encouraged in a house where Harper needed center stage. I joined volunteer programs on base and took on extra responsibilities. I figured if people were going to evaluate me, I might as well give them something worth evaluating. Months passed, packed with paperwork, interviews, and waiting, that felt like someone held my future in a slow cooker. Every time I opened my inbox, I braced for disappointment, not because I thought I wasn't capable, but because I'd spent years being told that certain things weren't for me. It takes time to unlearn that, even when you've done all the work. The email came on a Tuesday morning while I was folding uniforms on my rack. My heart kicked my ribs so hard it could have been trying to re-enlist without me. I opened it slowly, scanning for keywords, the kind that either crush you or make you feel like you can walk through a locked door without touching the handle. "Congratulations." I didn't read the rest immediately. I just sat there, hearing that one word echo through my head. Not once in my life had someone in my family used "congratulations" and "Kendra" in the same sentence unless Harper needed to make a joke about it. Seeing it in writing, tied to something I earned without anyone trying to sabotage it, hit me harder than I expected. I read the rest of the email 3 times before the reality settled in. I was going to officer candidate school. Training at OCS was different from boot camp. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving you could think clearly while being pushed past comfort. It wasn't enough to follow orders. You had to understand them, anticipate needs, manage people, and carry the kind of responsibility that didn't allow excuses. Plenty of candidates failed out. Some weren't ready. Some didn't want it as badly as they thought. Every time I got tired, I remembered Harper insisting I'd never survive the Navy. Every time doubt crept up, I remembered the night I walked out of that birthday party. Every time I worried I didn't belong, I I remembered the version of myself who dragged her own fear through deep water and refused to sink. The instructors were relentless, but they weren't cruel. They demanded precision, accountability, and confidence that didn't depend on volume. They taught us how to lead without acting like we were better than anyone. They drilled into us the idea that authority is borrowed, not owned, and that respect is earned only if you do the job right when nobody is watching. One instructor, a lieutenant with the driest humor I'd ever heard, once told me, "You don't need to talk louder, Morales. You just need to talk like you expect people to listen." So I did. Graduation day didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like stepping into a uniform that finally fit the version of myself I'd been building in pieces. My hands didn't shake when I adjusted the collar. My breathing stayed even. The room felt bright, but not overwhelming. When they called my name, I walked across the stage with a straight back and steady steps, seeing the future I'd carved out without anyone paving the road for me first. There were no parents in the audience, no Harper pretending to be proud, no family pictures waiting to be posted online. But it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. After the ceremony, one of my instructors shook my hand. "You're going to do good things," he said simply. "Not great things, not impressive things. Good things. Things grounded in purpose rather than image." That sentence stayed with me longer than any celebration could have. I reported to my new command with the calm confidence of someone who'd built herself from the ground up. Every step forward felt like shedding another layer of the person Harper tried to convince me I was. Nothing about where I stood now belonged to her. The life ahead of me didn't, either. I was done shrinking myself to fit inside a version of the world she approved of. The air felt different now, wider, steadier, and filled with possibilities that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. And standing in that new space, I could feel the next shift coming. The shift came quietly, not the kind you feel in your chest like a spark, but the kind you notice only when you catch yourself standing differently. Reporting to my new command as an officer gave me a rhythm that felt stable, almost predictable in the best way. My days were long, but they were mine. My decisions mattered. People relied on me. None of it felt like a performance or a comparison. It was work with purpose, and the steadiness hardened into confidence I didn't have to force. What I didn't expect was how life outside my uniform would start shifting too, especially the parts connected to Harper. We hadn't spoken since the night I left home. At first, I thought about her more than I admitted, usually in the context of old habits, old fears, old assumptions about myself. But as the months turned into years, she faded into the background noise of a life I no longer lived. Still, news has a way of finding you, even when you don't go looking. It started with a message from an old classmate who somehow ended up working in the same city as Harper. "Hey, not sure if you talked to your sister, but everything okay with her? Haven't seen her around her job lately." I stared at the message, trying to reconcile it with the image of Harper that lived in my memory. Always composed, always admired, always orbiting in some comfortable social circle. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't know what to do with the information. Harper's life had always felt like a separate planet, one I stopped orbiting the night I chose myself over her. Slowly, more pieces drifted my way. Aunt Linda posted about Harper's divorce on Facebook. Not directly. Of course, she took the passive-aggressive route with a vague quote about heartbreak and "some people deserve better." A cousin mentioned at Christmas, in a comment thread I didn't participate in, that Harper had been laid off due to company restructuring. That part didn't surprise me. Harper's strengths were charm and presentation, not long-term competence. Charm is great until someone needs actual results. The real blow came when Dad's investment tanked. He'd sunk a chunk of money into a business owned by a friend's nephew who apparently had big dreams and zero financial literacy. The whole thing went down in less than a year. Based on the frantic chain of comments under the family posts, Harper had taken the bigger hit. She'd built her life on stability and appearance, and the sudden collapse sent cracks running through everything she'd propped up for years. Still, I didn't reach out. Not because I wanted her to struggle, because I knew if I inserted myself too early, I'd be stepping back into a role I'd fought hard to leave behind. In my family, concern always turned into expectation, and expectation always turned into control. I wasn't going backward. More months passed. More promotions came my way. I built a reputation as someone who handled pressure without theatrics. Someone who spoke clearly. Someone who didn't need a spotlight to do her job well. I earned trust that had nothing to do with being loud and everything to do with being dependable. Then one night, after a long day of training evaluations, I checked my phone and saw a very familiar name sitting in my message requests. Harper. Just seeing her name made something old and heavy shift inside my chest. Not pain, just memory. I opened the message. Hey, I know it's been a long time. I could really use someone to talk to. Things are tough right now. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the nuclear-level humiliation she'd dropped on me at 18. Just a hand reaching out because hers had nothing to hold on to. I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I wasn't obligated to walk back into the emotional mess she'd created simply because she finally felt the crash she'd made me live through for years. Silence can be an act of self-respect. Another message came a week later. I might be moving, lost my place, still figuring things out. Another. Don't know if you hate me or something. I just could use help. Help. The same word she weaponized against me for years. The same word she dangled in front of adults to make me look incapable. Help had always been her currency. Now she was asking for it. But I didn't type anything. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, because forgiveness and access aren't the same thing. Months passed. Her messages slowed, then stopped, and for the first time since childhood, Harper wasn't a looming presence in my head. She wasn't a storm cloud waiting to burst. She was simply another adult, dealing with the consequences of the version of herself she'd chosen to be. Meanwhile, my own life continued in a way that finally felt free from her interference. I took on new leadership roles, mentored younger sailors, and handled responsibilities I never imagined touching back when I was the quiet kid living in a house where someone else consumed all the oxygen. It was sometime in my 5th year as an officer that I heard the part that finally connected everything. A coworker mentioned a civilian job opening on base, something administrative but stable, good hours, good benefits, predictable schedule, the kind of job people reached for when their lives needed rebuilding. I didn't think much of it until someone forwarded the applicant list to my inbox. Morales, these are the candidates for your interview block. I opened the file casually. There it was. Her name. Harper Morales. For a moment, the air in the room stretched thin. Not with panic, more like a deep, steady recognition that life sometimes circles back in ways no one plans. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She wasn't the star. She wasn't the voice everyone listened to. She was just a name on a list for a job she desperately needed. And I was the officer assigned to interview her. Nothing about that moment felt triumphant. It didn't feel vindictive or dramatic. It felt balanced. Like two lines finally intersecting after running parallel for too long. There was no rush of revenge, no thrill. Just the simple, solid truth that life had moved me forward while Harper stayed exactly where she'd always been, standing on a foundation built on image instead of substance. And as I prepared for the interview, I could feel something shift again, not out of anger or hurt, but out of a clarity I'd never had in my family's house. The clarity settled over me like a steady breath, the kind that makes your shoulders drop without realizing they were tense. Seeing Harper's name on a candidate list didn't send me spiraling back to childhood. It didn't crack open old insecurities or drag me into the mess of all the years she spent keeping me in her shadow. If anything, it felt like a reminder that I'd climbed out of a place she never believed I'd escape. The interview block was scheduled for Thursday morning. A simple lineup. 4 applicants for 3 openings. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Harper's file was ordinary brief work history, a few certificates, a resume that tried its best to sound impressive, but carried a faint tone of someone who'd never needed to build a solid foundation until her life forced the issue. If her name weren't printed across the top, she would have been just another applicant. When Thursday came, I arrived early. The hallway outside the interview room smelled faintly of printer ink and the stale air that always drifted from office HVAC systems. I set the folders on the table, went over the notes one last time, and told myself what I told every junior sailor before an evaluation. Handle the job, not the emotions. The first candidate showed up, a woman with prior base experience. Confident, prepared, polished. She walked in, answered questions clearly, and left with a good chance. The second applicant was nervous, but competent. A bit scattered, but sincere. Someone we could train, someone who'd appreciate the stability the position offered. The third had a strong administrative background. He practically recited policy manuals in his sleep, a safe hire. Then the door opened again, and Harper stepped inside. For a second, neither of us moved. She froze just long enough for her face to shift through recognition, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite place, maybe shame, maybe panic. Her hair was pulled back in a neat style that tried a little too hard to look effortless. Her clothes were conservative, professional. On the surface, she looked fine. Up close, she didn't. There was a tiredness under her eyes that no makeup could hide. A stiffness in her shoulders that didn't come from confidence. Harper had always entered rooms like she owned them. Now she entered like she didn't want anyone noticing her at all. "Kendra," she said quietly, almost like she wasn't sure she was allowed to use my name. "Miss Morales," I replied in the same tone I used for the other candidates. Professional, neutral, no edge. Her throat bobbed in a swallow. "I didn't know you worked here." "I do." That was it. No extra commentary, no apology-filled silence. Just a straightforward acknowledgement of reality. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Have a seat." She sat slowly, trying to compose herself. I watched her fold her hands on her lap, probably to hide the tremble in her fingers. Harper never trembled growing up. She never cracked. She never faltered. Seeing her like this wasn't satisfying or painful, it was simply factual, like noticing the weather had changed. I opened her file. "Tell me about your interest in the position." "Oh." Her voice wavered the first few words. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I need stability. I've done administrative work before. I'm organized. I work well with people." It sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced in the car but couldn't make the words land the way she wanted. I asked her the same questions I'd asked the other applicants. Strengths, weaknesses, examples of problem solving. She answered, though her confidence slipped in and out like a radio with bad reception. At one point she paused and said, "Kendra, can we just—" "This is a professional interview," I said calmly. "We'll stay on topic." Her cheeks flushed, not with anger, more with embarrassment. She nodded and looked down at her hands before forcing herself to continue. Halfway through, she finally looked at me straight. "You seem different," she said carefully. "People change," I replied. She blinked slowly. "I guess they do. The interview ended as smoothly as it could under the awkward wait between us. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "I know I don't have the right to ask you anything," she said quietly, "but I really need this job." I didn't respond to that. It wasn't part of the interview, and I wasn't going to let emotion hijack the process. She left the room with her shoulders curved inward, a posture I had never seen on her before. I finished evaluating the remaining files, aligning the skill levels and job requirements with the needs of the department. Every part of the process was standardized, structured, and immune to personal history. That was the point of the uniform, to prevent favoritism, grudges, or emotional interference. When I reached Harper's file again, the decision wasn't hard. Experience, insufficient. Stability, questionably. Integrity, concerning. The integrity part wasn't about our personal history. It came from the inconsistencies in her resume, the vague job descriptions, and the unexplained employment gaps. It was the same standard we used for every civilian hire. My pen hovered over the final section for only a moment before I wrote it. Not recommended. No anger. No satisfaction. Just honesty. A few hours later, after paperwork and follow-up emails were done, I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon. The sunlight reflected off the building's glass, the breeze carried dust across the lot, and the bass carried on with its usual rhythm. Sailors walked past, chatting about schedules and weekend plans. Life kept moving. I felt something shift, not in the dramatic sense, not like closure or triumph. It was quieter than that, like an internal exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Choosing myself over Harper had once felt like rebellion. Now it simply felt normal. Walking across the lot after the interviews, I felt a strange calm settle into my bones. Not relief, not tension. Just a quiet steadiness that came from knowing I had done my job the same way I would have done it for anyone else. No bending, no favoritism, no retaliation. The decision about Harper wasn't personal, it was correct. And for the first time in my life, being right didn't need to come with a speech or apology or anyone's approval. 2 days later, HR sent out the standard notifications to the candidates. 3 were hired. 1 wasn't. I didn't see the emails. That wasn't part of my lane. My job was to interview, evaluate, and move on. But life has a way of looping people back around whether you expect it or not. It was late afternoon when I stepped into the hallway outside my office and found Harper waiting. She stood near the water fountain, holding her purse with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The fluorescent lights overhead washed out her face, highlighting the strain she'd tried to hide in the interview. She wasn't crying, but she looked like someone who hadn't slept. When she saw me, she straightened old reflexes, old posture, but the confidence never reached her eyes. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. Her voice was small, not dramatic, not whining, just tired. I nodded once. "A minute." We walked into the small conference room down the hall. The hum of the HVAC filled the space between us. She set her purse on the table, then immediately picked it back up, as if she didn't trust leaving it anywhere. "I didn't get the job," she said. Not a question. A statement. I didn't respond. She already knew I wouldn't soften the truth. She let out a shaky breath. "Was it because of us?" "No," I said plainly. "It was because of your resume." "Oh." She blinked rapidly, not offended, just caught off guard by the bluntness. I continued, "Your work history didn't show the stability the position requires. Your descriptions weren't clear. There were gaps you didn't explain." Her shoulders sagged. Not dramatically, but enough. "I thought maybe," she said quietly, "you'd give me a chance." There was no manipulation in her voice. No guilt trip. Just the bare honesty of someone who had spent her whole life assuming doors would open simply because she knocked. For once, she wasn't performing. She wasn't the center of the room. She wasn't the golden child. I met her eyes, steady. "I gave you the same evaluation I gave everyone else. That's what fairness looks like." She swallowed, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess it does." A long, heavy silence settled between us, not hostile, not angry. Just layered with years of things she never apologized for, and years of things I no longer needed an apology for. Harper sat down, her hands fidgeting with a loose thread on her sleeve. "You know, when I saw you walk into that interview room, I thought I was hallucinating." She let out a humorless laugh. "Last time I saw you, you were driving away from home in a car full of dirty clothes." "People grow," I said simply. "Yeah." She looked down. "You really did." Another quiet stretch. Then, softer, she said, "I wasn't a good sister to you." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest version she was capable of. And I didn't need more than that. I had stopped needing more a long time ago. I didn't answer. Not to punish her. Just because nothing meaningful needed to be said. She looked up again. "Do you ever think about coming home?" "I am home," I said. And it was the truest thing I'd ever said out loud. Harper's eyes glistened for a moment, before she blinked it away. She wasn't trying to guilt me. She wasn't trying to manipulate the moment. She was realizing she had finally become the person on the outside of the door instead of the one holding the handle. She stood, smoothing her blouse. "Thank you for seeing me, even if it wasn't the answer I hoped for." I nodded, professional to the end. "Take care of yourself." She lingered a beat longer, like she wanted to say something else, maybe sorry, maybe thank you, maybe I don't know how my life ended up here, but she didn't. She just left the room quietly, her footsteps soft against the linoleum, her silhouette smaller than I remembered. I didn't watch her walk away. I gathered the remaining paperwork on the table and moved on with my day, not out of coldness, but because the moment didn't require anything more from me. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in the barracks, the soft hum of bass noise drifting through the window, distant footsteps, muffled conversations, the low rumble of aircraft in the distance. A familiar thought settled in. The revenge Harper feared I'd want was never about destroying her life. It was about building my own. And the strangest part was that denying her the job didn't feel like revenge at all. It felt like balance. Like the world had finally arranged itself the way it should have been all along, not with Harper above and me below, but both of us simply standing where our choices placed us. There was no triumph in it, no victory lap, just clarity. For the first time, I didn't feel like the shadow sister, or the quiet one, or the girl who got mocked for daring to dream. I felt like someone who had taken every piece of pain, humiliation, and doubt, and forged them into something solid. I set my boots neatly by the door and turned off the light, letting the room fade into darkness, letting the day settle without bitterness or weight. Nothing about my strength came from beating Harper. It came from no longer needing her to lose for me to win. The steadiness from that day carried into the following weeks without interruption, settling into my routine like a familiar rhythm. Work stayed demanding, but not overwhelming. My team ran smoothly. My decisions held weight. My confidence no longer felt like armor, it felt like skin. And with Harper no longer tugging at the edges of my mind, everything felt clearer, quieter, sharper. When the invitation to the annual Navy Ball landed on my desk, it didn't feel like some grand milestone. It felt like another event on the calendar: formal uniform, assigned seating, the usual ceremony. I'd attended a few before, but this year, my commanding officer pulled me aside casually and said, "You'll be recognized in front of the room. Small acknowledgement, nothing dramatic." Nothing dramatic in military language meant, "You've been doing real work, and people noticed." I ironed my dress whites the afternoon of the event, smoothing every crease until the fabric shined. The mirror reflected a version of myself I understood. Steady posture, clear eyes, the kind of presence I used to search for in other people. Now it lived in my own reflection. When I arrived at the venue, the ballroom glowed with warm lights bouncing off polished floors. Flags lined the stage, and the hum of conversation filled the air as uniforms, gowns, and suits swept through the room. The scent of polished wood, perfume, and freshly cooked food mixed together in a way that felt almost nostalgic. I was checking in with the usher when I heard my name spoken from behind me. "Kendra." I turned and saw Harper standing near the entrance. I didn't flinch. I didn't freeze. I simply recognized her, the way you recognize a chapter you already finished reading. She wasn't dressed glamorously, just a simple dress, a cardigan draped neatly around her shoulders. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. She looked normal. And for Harper, normal was new. She offered a tentative smile. "I got a ticket. A friend had an extra, said these events were worth seeing." I nodded once. No anger, no shock, just acknowledgement. "Enjoy the evening." Her eyes searched mine, not desperately, not pleading, just studying, like she was trying to understand the difference between the girl she mocked and the woman standing in front of her. "I'm not here to bother you," she said softly. "I just wanted to see what your world looks like." There was no bitterness in her voice, just an honesty she'd never allowed herself growing up. I didn't invite conversation, but I didn't shut her down either. We walked to separate tables. Mine was closer to the front, arranged with officers, chiefs, and a few distinguished guests. Harper found a seat toward the back with civilians and plus ones. I didn't look her way again, but I felt her gaze occasionally quiet, cautious, unsure. The ceremony began with the usual formality: speeches, acknowledgements, applause. I listened, attentive, but calm, until my name came through the speakers. "Lieutenant Junior Grade Kendra Morales." A gentle wave of applause moved across the room as I rose from my seat. Not thunderous, not dramatic, just warm respect. My commanding officer shook my hand firmly before stepping aside so I could stand at the center of the stage. From the podium, he spoke plainly, the way he always did. "She's earned the reputation of someone who leads without seeking attention, solves problems without creating noise, and carries responsibility without ever needing to announce it. That's the kind of officer we want representing us." A few people clapped louder. Someone let out a low whistle. I kept my posture straight, my expression steady, absorbing the moment without letting it swell into something it didn't need to be. When the applause faded, I stepped off the stage and returned to my seat. People at my table offered subtle nods, small acknowledgments. Nothing about it felt performative. It simply felt earned. But when I finally glanced toward the back of the room, I saw Harper, standing, not clapping for show, not smiling for attention. She stood quietly, while the people around her remained seated, her hands clasped in front of her, her chin lowered not in shame, but in the kind of humbled recognition that arrives when life holds up a mirror you can't ignore. Her eyes met mine for a moment, soft, reflective, open in a way I'd never seen growing up. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't seeking forgiveness. She wasn't performing. She was acknowledging. And that was more powerful than any apology she could have offered. I held her gaze only long enough to understand the message behind it, not regret for my sake, but awareness of her own past, her own choices, her own downfall. She had, finally, seen the real version of me, the one she spent years working to bury. Dinner followed, conversations drifted, music started, people mingled and laughed and enjoyed the night. Nothing dramatic happened, no family blow-ups, no tearful reconciliation, no confrontation, just two adults existing in the same room for the first time without the roles we once played. When I left the ballroom later that night, the air outside was cool and steady. The base lights glimmered off parked cars, the faint hum of generators rolling through the quiet. Harper stood near the exit, arms folded loosely, as if waiting but not expecting. When I reached her, she spoke gently. "You look good, Kendra." "Thank you. I'm glad you found something that fits you," she added. "Really?" Her voice carried sincerity, not envy, and that sincerity, modest, understated, felt like the real closure I never needed but could finally recognize. I nodded, a simple acknowledgement. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange promises or apologies. We simply understood each other in a way we'd never managed before. Then we walked our separate ways into the night. No bitterness, no unfinished business. She carried the weight of her choices. I carried the strength built from mine. And for the first time in our lives, that was enough. My journey in the military was never about proving my sister wrong. It was about proving my own capability. Everything I built came from choosing growth over bitterness, purpose over performance, action over fear. And if you've been through anything like this, family heartbreak, jealousy, betrayal, you probably know exactly what that kind of peace feels like. If you want more military and family revenge stories like this, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. I read every single one, and you never know who out there might need to hear your story too.